My name is Rogelio Delgado Jr. Some people just call me Roy. I don't know why. I guess because my dad's name's Roy. So I'm Roy Delgado Jr. My role at Klipsch is to make speakers. I think my title is Principal Engineer. I engineer principals. That's why the school sucked today. I got lucky. A lot of divine intervention. I ended up at Klipsch. There was two young pups there. Young pups. I was one of them, and Kerry Geist was the other. And it was just Jim Hunter and some other guys, some new guys, some fresh blood were brought in, and we were going like, so what are we supposed to do now? And Kerry had known Paul. He grew up with Paul. He grew up in Hope. And in fact, Ms. Valerie tells a pretty cool story. I hope you see this, Kerry. She told me a pretty cool story about, because Kerry's mom and Valerie were good friends. And he said, oh yeah, he would run around, he would be running around. He went up to Paul one day and tapped him in the belly, and Paul looked down and he said, I'm gonna work for you one day. Ha ha. And so, so Kerry said, don't tell that story. Well, too bad. So anyway, we started talking to Paul a lot. And I was talking to Paul one day, and Kerry and I were brought in for the commercial series, and so we started looking at large format compression drivers and high powered woofers, and we're trying to get some product ready for the commercial side. So Paul would always request, and we would always show him anyway, all the data we gathered. He was just interested in the stuff we were doing, and of course we were always bugging him about what do we do now, except he would answer our question with a question, irritating us all get out, but he, that's the way he made us learn. So anyway, I was sitting in there one day with Paul, and he says, I've been looking at that data that you guys have on those large format compression drivers. He said, if we're able to get the Klipsch horn LF just a little bit higher, we could use one of those compression drivers and take it back to a two-way, take the Klipsch horn back to a two-way. And, he kind of, so what do you think about trying something like that? He says, is it just going to be the Klipsch horn LF, because that has to be redesigned? And he said, no, I have an idea of what I want to do with the Klipsch horn LF. How I want to, and back then Paul drew on full-size drafting paper, big E size. And so you see, he started to lay it out, and he showed me some things that he was doing. And I said, you know what, Paul, let's try it. Let's try it. So we built some. I'm glad we had model makers back then. We built a lot of LF cabinets, and I would run the data. The best we got was 550 hertz. He wanted to take it out to about 800 hertz, and after a while, he was getting disappointed, and I was getting mad at myself because he was getting disappointed, and we couldn't figure this out. So one day we went fishing. I know that sounds cliche, but I did. I went fishing, and because I was involved in the commercial side, I started looking at the prototypes a little different. I started looking at them as two acoustic sources, not just a bifurcated horn, but two acoustic sources. And I realized that we had what they call the splay angle. That's the angle between the cabinets, too wide. And so I said, I'm gonna go in there Monday and try something. So I just cut these boards, stuck them in the LF. And I mean, just literally just tacked them on. I just wanted to see if it would change anything. And it did. It went out to about 850 hertz. Boy, I was ecstatic. I grabbed that curve, ran into Paul's office, and I said, look at this. And he goes, what did you do? I said, Paul, they're splayed too far. And he says, show me the speaker, show me the cabinet. So he got up, and we walked over there. He says, how soon can you draw one up so you can get it built? And I said, I'll do it today. It'll probably be built tomorrow. And so I gave the drawings over, I think it was Rick Robbins at the time. And no, maybe Mike. Anyway, no, I think it was Mike. And got that sucker out, we tested it, and it worked. It worked. And actually, you know, I skipped a lot, because what happened when we actually got in working at LF, that was like 1997, I believe. And we had been talking about it for a long time, but I also had my other duties. We actually had developed an HF horn in '92. It was a compromise. Paul liked collapsing polars. I like constant coverage. We used to have discussions on which one was better. And so I said, let's do it like the K5J. The K5J is the original, one of the original horn on the Klipsch horn. It's the one that sits on top, uncovered, like those 54 and 57 that we have at the museum. And there's been a lot of people, a lot of engineers at Klipsch that have studied that horn, particular horn, me included. And I said, why don't we just do it like the K5J? The K5J had constant 90 degrees and collapsing verticals, and Paul agreed. But the one trick I did use was I used track tricks. And by '92, Paul wasn't quite convinced that track tricks was the thing to do. I got the help from a friend of mine at UT. He did, because Paul could be way up here, and then he could be a tinkerer. And I can't be way up there, so I'll be a tinkerer. And so I showed him the data, and the problem he had was looking at the horn and looking at the data and trying to connect the two together. So I found my friend John Post, who was doing a PhD at University of Texas, and he did the study. He sent me a copy of his, what is it, dissertation? Is that right? I looked at it, read it. I went into Paul's office and I said, here's why track tricks work, sir. And he spent like 3 weeks going through it, making sure all the equations were right, of course. So that was later on when he got convinced about track tricks. But anyway, once we got the LF going, I pulled out, at the time I was working on a smaller horn, and I pulled out the original, because it was on a shelf. I mean, when I'm with Paul, a lot of the ideas that he comes up with and we work on, I just put on the shelf, because it's not time, I guess. So I dusted off the 403 horn, and Paul wanted to hear it. So I said, let me make a quick network, and I'll set them up in the sound room, and you can come in and listen to them. And he said, okay. So I put a standard Klipsch horn on one corner, and I put a Jubilee on the other corner, the Klipsch horn 2 on the other corner. And he came in there, and he liked Oompa stuff and classical music and stuff. So I was playing in some music, and back then it was behind, where we had the sofa, the equipment was behind the speaker, so I could see his reaction. And his reaction was like, and then he started shaking his head. And I'm like, oh man, something's wrong. So I turned down the music and I asked Paul, what's wrong? And he said, we can't call it the Klipsch horn 2. And I said, why? And he said, because it's so much better than the Klipsch one. I was floored. And I said, sir, you're Paul Klipsch. You can call it whatever you want. And you know why now I know it was in '96? Because that was the 50th anniversary of Klipsch. And he said, and I know what we'll call it. We'll call it the Klipsch Horn Jubilee. And I went, we can call it popcorn, no problem. And that's how it got separated from being a Klipsch horn 2 to being its own product. So the next thing that happened was we started getting drawings ready, take it into production. The 403 horn, as we called it, was at constant 90 collapsing verticals in the same flavor of the K5J. And Paul wanted it to be naked. He didn't want a cabinet around it. He really wanted it to be like the original Klipsch horn, naked HF horn. We had chosen a compression driver, a really nice one. I designed the woofers, but somebody, I think Paul said, do you think we can make it out of wood? And I said, let's find out. We had CNC machines at the time, but not, I mean, this is just the beginning of CNCs. Like right now you have 5-axis machines, you can cut anything, almost anything you want on these CNC machines. And I had learned how to program them, so I tried and tried and tried, and I couldn't figure it out. Back then, you made phone calls and went to shows to try to make contacts with people. And I found 3 companies that said they could do it. 2 of them bailed out because once they attempted to do it, they found out it was real hard. But one company actually sent us prototypes, and they gave us quotes. Really pretty horns, had all the detail of whatever the Tractrix equation needed on the inside. Then it became priority to get the word out. And so I think we made 3 Jubilees, real pretty ones with grills, with this horn standing on top of it. Went to CES. First time I'd ever gone to CES. I always found a way to get out of it. I said, I gotta help Paul. But since Paul was going this time, I got to go. But it's cool. It was really cool because I got to just sit back and watch Paul. He probably thought I was stalking him or something. But it was just I think the thing that surprised me, and yeah, people liked the Jubilees. We were playing them. But there was a lot of people that just came to pay their homage to Paul. A lot of people in the industry that just wanted to meet Paul. And some of the comments I got to hear, you know, if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing. And that started to remind me of Paul's, his statement was, if I've achieved more than the previous generation did in audio, it's because I stood on the shoulders of giants. And I think that these people understood that. They just really came to pay their respects, and, you know, because you really, at that time, this was what, 99, I think. You didn't know how much longer Paul was going to be around, you know. Although he acted like he was going to live to be 130. I said, I want to see that patent. He once told me that he worked for this guy in Houston, oil prospecting. And I don't know if you could put this on the video, so you might have to edit it out. But his boss told him one time, and he's always pushing him for patents. He says, if you piss with your left hand, I want a patent on it. So all these people came up, you know, and that probably was the most, that that was very satisfying to me. That I got to be with Paul all the time, you know, and so you know, we got to be friends and everything. But to watch all these other people, how he affected so many lives, they wanted to come see him, and they stood in line. There was a line for me to come talk to Paul Klipsch. So that was really cool, and I realized that that I was very blessed to work with Paul Klipsch. So so we went back, started to get everything ready to go into production. The horn guys told me, we can probably do the horn for you for production, but we're gonna have to raise the price 5 times because it was so hard to do. So I told Paul, I said, Mr. K, you know, we can do fiberglass, and we can even do injection molding. You know, you have a lot of pull in the company to pay for the tool. So there are other ways to do it. Well, he wanted, he really wanted the wood horn. Some of the guys in the model shop thought that we could build a core and veneer it ourselves. And so here we are, we figured out the mounting mechanisms, all brass, and Paul gets sick. And 2 months later, passes away. And so because this was, he was championing the product, he, the push to get the product into production died with him. You know, and I understand, home theater was a big deal. You know, all our resources were being put into that. Because I was juggling that and the commercial side. And also being the chief engineer and, you know, what they were doing and all this other stuff. But this other one with Paul is like, it's passion, you know? I just, I didn't care. My wife, when I was married, she was actually pretty understanding, because I'd be at Klipsch on Saturdays and part of Sundays, because I wanted those things, the Jubilee, to be pushed forward. So anyway, we roll forward, and I guess Klipsch started the Klipsch Forum. And well, there's one thing I did forget. I had come up with the idea for the horn-loaded vented system. And back then, I wasn't under any kind of contract, so I patented it myself. Whoops. Mike Klipsch became the lawyer for Klipsch, and he thought that I should sell it to Klipsch. And I said, okay. So I was reading all the data for that, and I was showing Paul at the same time. I said, look at this, Mr. K, it's kind of a weird thing. And, you know, he'd always request, you know, more and more data. And I said, do you think we should include this in the Jubilee? And he said, you know what? We're already so far into production of it. Let's save it for the Jubilee too. See, he thought he was going to live to be 130. And I said, you go, dude. You know, one thing I did not mention was, when I came to work for Paul Klipsch, he was 82 years old. You know, he certainly was not no spring chicken. And yet, he didn't act like it. And it surprised me to find out how old he was after I thought, well, how old was Paul? It kind of surprised me how old he was, because it was just a number, because the way Paul pushed and pushed, you know, state of the art, state of science. You know, he was not satisfied. You know, you would think a guy that had been doing that for that long and the company was doing good, you know, that he'd go play golf or something. That wasn't Paul. And so, heck, I know 45, 50-year-olds that are already stubborn-headed like Matt over there. So because he was always pushing, well, he kind of, especially when he had his, you know, when he had his engineering crew, he was proud of his boys, you know. Like a lot of people don't understand how much Paul Klipsch had to do with the KG4, the KG2, the KG5, which was later renamed the Forte. But Paul wanted to step back and let his boy shine. That's just the way he was. He was kind of like a, you know, father figure. And so anyway, so I showed it to him, and he said, "We'll just wait till the Jubilee 2." And I said, "Okay." Well, then, like I said, he passed away. And then Klipsch brought up started doing a public forum on our website. And one day, Trey contacts me and he says, you have to get on. He said, "Are you in the forum?" And I said, "No, I'm not in the forum." He says, "You have to get on the forum." And I said, "Well, why?" And he said, "Because there's a lot of people upset because we're not going to produce a Jubilee." And I said, and I'm going to change their minds or change Klipsch's mind? Which one is it? He said, I told him, "I don't want to get on the forum." He goes, "Come on, bro, you got to, brother. You got to get on the forum." So I got on the forum and I was like, oh, wow. These guys are not shy. And, you know, all sorts of comments like, "You guys need to bring back the Jubilee, you need to show Paul respect and everything." And I'm like, I said, "Listen," and I began to try to explain a little bit about it, what had happened, right? And how this was, you know, yes, this was Paul's last design, and it was just really hard to get into production. The wooden horn was a big deal, and you know, and Paul was a champion of it, and of course, then they tried to, well, why aren't you picking it up, right? I said, "What's your address, brother? I want to go over there and show you in person why." So anyway, I got frustrated. Now, before Paul died, I asked him, because it was a dual 12 high efficiency LF horn, okay? Being a pro guy. I asked Paul, we got into cinema, and so I asked Paul, can I take the LF into the cinema side, because we have the dual 15 MWM, but we don't have something smaller, then we can step up to direct radiators. And he said, "Sure, go ahead." So I put it into production on the commercial side. And so maybe it was a mistake, because what ended up happening was I got frustrated with those guys, and I said, "You know what? At this year's pilgrimage, I'm going to show you a Jubilee. I'm going to show you a Jubilee." And my intent was to discourage them. That was my intent, was to just, this is not your simple 2-wire plug-in and you walk away and listen to it. I said, I got them good. So I got a couple of commercial black textured, industrial looking LS. I got the biggest horn I could find, the 402, not painted, not nothing, because it goes behind the screen on the cinema. I got an active crossover from that were being used in the cinemas. Those guys are like way ahead as far as time delay and using DSP and stuff like that for audio. And and I got a 4-channel amplifier. I went and bought me a fancy dancy $39 CD player. I got it set up in the lab. Here comes the first group. And they looked at him and they went like, "That's the Jubilee." And I go, "Yep, that's the Jubilee." So I played them some cuts, and you know what? They sound awesome. They do, they sound awesome. But what I was just trying to discourage them was the looks, because they're used to, like, you know, pretty woods and stuff like that, right? And simple, you know, 2 pairs of wire. Well, where do they go? Well, after the first demo, this one guy, and yes, I'm naming you out again, Michael Beasley. We have a Mike Beasley at the plant, and when he came up and introduced himself to me as Michael Beasley, I just laughed because I said, "You can't have that name. There's already a Mike Beasley here." And he came up to me and he goes, "Roy, I own Klipsch horns. Love my Klipsch horns." And he was into getting the room right. I mean, he's got diffusers, bass traps. I mean, this is early 2000s, okay? He says, "I love my Klipsch horns, but I've never heard anything like that." And I said, "Well, good. I'm glad you liked them. How can I get a pair?" And I looked at him and I said, "You want a pair of these things in your living room?" He says, "Roy, that's the best I've ever heard. And they're as good as my Klipsch horns are. They're just, yeah, I want a pair in my living room." And I said, "You're not married, are you?" And he said, "No." I said, "Figures." But right behind him was another guy named Richard. And I forget his last name, which is good. He lives on a street called Coyote. He's on the forum. So I called him Coyote minus an O. And Mike, I call him Mike from Tennessee so I can keep him straight from our Mike. And he comes up and I said, "Yes, sir, can I help you?" And he said, "I want a pair too." And I said, "You guys are crazy. I mean, you guys are gonna have to buy, because I'm not just gonna get, your DSP and Pro. You're gonna have to buy one of these, a DX38. And you're gonna have to have 4 channels amplification, okay, in order to make this run. I can download that program, but I'm not gonna do another DSP. You tell us where to buy the equipment, or just point us in the right direction and we'll get it." And I asked Richard, I said, "Are you married?" And he goes, "Yes." And I said, "Not for long." I made a mistake. I agreed I would help him get the Jubilees, okay? The mistake I made was I should have told them that they can't tell anybody, because it took a lot just to get them those 4 pieces, because back then commercial and consumer are separated, right? And I had to get my buddy Doug from Ace to agree to sell consumers commercial pieces. And some of the gear that he sold the DX38, he sold some amplifiers that they could use. Well, those 2 boneheads go on the forum and start talking about them. And, there was your classical people that said, "This is all Roy, and Paul didn't have nothing to do with the Jubilee." I'm going like, "What, did you conjure him up and ask him, or what?" You know what you're talking about, so. But then there were those that wanted to hear him. So I started, I started doing it almost every pilgrimage. Some of these guys went over to Richard and Mike's house to listen to the Jubilees. I finally said uncle. I set up through ACE the ability for them to just contact them. I said, well, first you contact me and I tell them it's okay to sell them this, so they wouldn't get in trouble. And some of them are being sold sight unseen. Australia, Japan, Germany, Italy. Richard, he started to keep a tab on the Jubilee owners, the underground Jubilee owners, you know, the ones, the commercial ones. Mike from Tennessee, he decided that the pilgrimage was not enough time to hang with the Jubes, I guess. So he asked, him and about 20 others asked me if they could have an event specifically to explore the Jubilee. Called it Jube Fest. And I said, sure, you know, we can do that. You know, by that time, I just, you know, why fight the rip current? Just go with it, bro. And we had about 5 or 6. We tried a whole bunch of stuff. And that went pretty well. I still do one of the colleges there in Arkadelphia. I was contacted by the acoustics professor if they could bring over their class, right? And so they would come over, give them a quick tour of the plant, take them into the lab, you know, show them acoustic principles, and that yes, I get paid to do speakers. And we show them Jubilee. When people started asking me like, how does a Forte 4 sound? I said, it sounds okay. How does a Cornwall sound? I said, sounds okay. And people thought I was just being coy, right? Well, the reason I say that is because I heard a Jubilee. And Jubilees sound awesome. Yeah, I'm not trying to be coy. I'm not trying to be, you know, a smart ass. I'm just, no, I'm trying to be honest. You know, and people ask me, you know, every time one of the new speakers would come out, you know, they'd ask me, you know, how does it sound? How does it sound? Even when we did like the Cornwall 3, Heresy 3, you know, the AK5, K-Horn, AL4, La Scala, and then when we upgraded them, well, I want to save that story. I would say, you know, they sound okay because they do. They sound dynamic. You know, we pay a lot of attention. I used to think, you know, I've been headhunted by other companies, and the first question I would tell, or the first question I would ask them back was, "Are you ready to become Klipsch?" And they would say, "Well, no, you know, we're so and so." And I said, "Because you don't understand. I really believe the old man. I mean, I had a talk with Paul Klipsch when I first interviewed for 45 minutes and totally convinced that was the only way to do speakers. So if I want to come work for you, I'm bringing Klipsch." Because this is the only way that I feel that Paul was onto something, and those kinds of principles are not something that's like they're not a mantra. They really are a way to do speakers. They really are foundational, and so I'm just not going to forget that. You know, it's like, you know, how do you forget to be a bonehead? You don't. You just live it. So I wasn't trying to be coy or nothing, but then one day, you know, during all this time, we're making Klipsch horns, the Scalas, Heresies, Cornwalls in in the Hope manufacturing facility, and all this time, you know, I forget who it was. One of the sales guys called me Pepe Le Pew, because I do a lot of skunk works, and all this time I'm still continuing on the conversations that we had, Paul and I had, on the things that, how do we solve this problem? How do we solve this problem? You know, how do we push? How do we keep pushing? You know, again, that was one of those things that was ingrained in me. Here's an 82-year-old guy still pushing, you know. So that it wasn't that he was just trying to, you know, irritate the crap out of his engineers. It's that he was genuinely wanted state of the art to go forward. And so all that time, I'm working on stuff that nobody knows about. And one of those was the Jubilee. I was still looking what could be done to the Jubilee to make it, you know, to make it the Jubilee 2 maybe, as Paul wanted. And so one day we hired this guy named Rob Stanley. And him and Kerry guys come visit me, and they want to talk about updating the heritage. So they come up and they say, so were there things that Paul wanted to do to the heritage product? And I said, absolutely there was. Why? And he says, see, Rob told me he worked for company that sold a lot of heritage. I think it was called Vans or something like that. And he often wondered why it was never, you know, we were putting out new tech and other speakers, and why the heritage wasn't getting the love and attention that it needed. And I'm sure that there was a concerted effort in Indy. You know, I'm sure, you know, Rob talked to a lot of people about this, and then they finally came down to Hope, and I said there is absolutely stuff that we can do to the heritage stuff that Paul wanted, like for example steep slope networks, you know, wide dispersion phasing plugs, just and changing some of the horns out in the old heritage. They were still exponential, changing them out to tractrix, and but I kind of made a deal with Rob. I said, we'll do this, only we can introduce the Jubilee. He goes, what's a Jubilee? Well, come on over, let me show you. And so anyway, that's how the project actually got back started up again. I think Rob came to work in 2016, I believe. Around 2016. Now, before Rob, you know, Mark Hoffman and Kerry, because Kerry was the one that brought up bringing back the Forte, and that was supposed to have been part of this, you know, rejuvenation of the, and part of it also was to update cosmetics and stuff like that, you know, and so this rejuvenation of the Jubilee, it's like I was a kid at a candy store, you know. I wanted to let all these things out that I'd actually been putting in other product, but not in the heritage. Somebody told me we did some sort of marketing. Now this would be hearsay, I don't know if it's true or not, but this is what I heard. And in fact, the two experts on this, you know, they can fact check me, are sitting right over there. That we did a marketing study, and that people told, these people asked people about Klipsch. What was the first thing on their mind? And the first thing on their mind, the biggest answer, largest answer was Paul Klipsch. And so then we started to do a lot of refocusing back on Mr. K, which I thought was cool. I often wonder why JBL never did for Mr. Harmon, you know, just because he's a kind of a pioneer too, you know. And he was around for a while, or that company's been around for a while. But anyway, so we started to do a lot of Paul Klipsch and stuff like that. So I was a kid in a candy store, and then as part of the Jubilee, then I said, okay, we need to figure out how we're going to do this. I finally came up with a prototype that I was happy with, and we were at a sales meeting. I had been talking to Tony, and he's our ID guy. In fact, you'll probably talk to him later. And him and Rob were going to work on, you know, how do you put lipstick on this thing, right? And so at one of the sales meetings, Tony wasn't there, but they made a full stand-up. Apparently Tony had done one. Nobody had told me. And I said it was kind of like going to be like a little bit of a tease to the dealers, you know, about the Jubilee. Well, it was a tease to me too. And I said, man, that looks freaking awesome. And so we finally got the cosmetics, and I was actually already set on some of the compression drivers, but I had a friend of mine who works at Celestion, and he said, Roy, I want to send you this driver that we just came up with, and I want you to test it. And I went, dude, not another compression driver. And he says, no worries, it's special. I wouldn't just tell you, you know, if it wasn't special. So he sent it to me, and I was thoroughly impressed with it. So we switched the drivers. And at that time, I was doing everything, of course, actively, you know, through an EVTX38. It's an oldie but a goodie. And so then I got involved with Matt. Matt Spitz. You ought to interview him too. Because Spitz, when I talked to him about the electronic crossover, you know, I said, dude, it has to be the primo of the primo. Okay? He says, you mean I actually get to spend some dollars? And not worry about saving nickels? I said, dude, whatever it takes. It's got to be clean. It's got to sound musical. You know, I'll give you the settings, whatever. And we went back and forth, and excellent job, Matt. I'm very, very happy with the way this thing sounds. It is. It is the best of the best. It's one of the best sounding DSPs. You know, and that's one of the reasons I chose the DX38, because back then there were not very many that sounded so musical. And so Matt Spitz nailed it. I mean, he just nailed it. And then together with the system, and then we got the compression driver, we figured out the LF, and then it was just one tiny little detail. How do we make them in production? Oh, here you go, here all the parts go. So we built, and we built, and we built, and we built, and we built. Change here, change there. I actually made, or with the supervisor from Cabinet, Martin, not Martin, Martin Hernandez, and I built probably 10, rejected the first 2 because I, you know, hey, you know, I'm a fisherman guy, not a cabinet maker. And then we made some more, and we found, you know, some more tweaks to make. When I left Monday, we had 3 pairs packed up. Beautiful. beautiful looking. There are people coming from the plant. Saw guy cuts the panels. They're the people that finish them, and the people that paint them and lacquer them, but never all together, right? So Terry, he's the finishing guy, got a great idea. He says, you know what, I want to bring all those people, do you care? I said, no, bring them. I want them to see how their part fit into this. And so it was a kind of I wish, like, I know Paul's looking down, and I'm sure he was very pleased. There were people from the plant taking pictures of themselves with the Jubilees. And I'm going like, pride, you know, and the workmanship. Those guys don't get much kudos. I was very pleased too, because this is Paul's, last design, and through, well, it's like Paul at, I guess it was a dealer's meeting or something. He said, if it takes you 17 years to design, no, he says, because I've been at Klipsch now going on 37 years. It only took Roy 36 years to design the Jubilee, but whatever it takes. It is. It's. I mean, 2 months after coming to work for Paul, and he wanted to take it to Klipsch Horn too, and then finally there. It's very gratifying, and it has all the tech that Paul and I talked about. That's what I like. If he was alive today, that's where we would be. He wanted all the stuff that we talked about that was put on the shelf was pulled off the shelf and inserted into the Jubilee. Because you know what? It needs to be there. This is the top of the line. And Paul himself crowned it as the new head of Heritage. Back then it wasn't called Heritage, but he crowned it as the new head of Heritage. And there's a reason for it.